Now, without any further delay, let's begin today's event. I would like to introduce your presenter for today, and that is Steve Powers. Steve Powers is an executive with more than 30 years of business and technology management experience spanning several industries. He is currently the president and CEO of Redstone Consulting Group, a subsidiary of Redstone Federal Credit Union. The Redstone Consulting Group focuses on streamlining credit union operations by automating manual processes. Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to everyone joining us today for our webinar on how you can use technology to streamline your exam preparation processes and save time and energy in the process. Today, I'd like to go over a few things with you before the demonstration, cover the background on the ACID exam, give some examples of where the time goes when you're working to prepare for an exam, point out some areas where we've seen the ability to save some of that time through automation, then go through a demonstration of the portal, and take questions at the end. So first, in case you haven't heard, what is the ACID exam? This is the NCUA cyber exam approach. They piloted it in 2017. They applied it to credit unions of $1 billion and up in 2018. This approach really tracks the FSIEC cap using the same risk profile and the main maturity statements. It augments the CAP, however, by asking for documentary evidence in about 67 different categories associated back to each of the statements, so that not only do you have to answer the statements, but provide proof of how you're going that substantiates that answer. If you go through the entire thing, there's over 500 items you have to respond to. And at the end result, just like with the FFIEC CAT, you end up with a risk profile, cyber posture, and a maturity level with some areas of improvement identified. Who should worry about it? Well, as I said, in 2017, it was a proof of concept. In this year, 2018, it's applied to credit unions of $1 billion and up. Next year, it will go down to as far as credit unions of $100 million and up in assets. And there's been some preliminary discussion of it may apply to all credit unions starting in 2020, at least a streamlined version of it. So where does the time go? Well, like any project, there's a lot that goes into making it successful. You do spend time tracking items, preparing status, progress reports, just encouraging your team members to keep working and making progress. You have to usually report internally, sometimes to the board, to satisfy executive requests. Coordination in any project with a bunch of folks involved, you have to orchestrate the handoffs. You end up with a bunch of meetings to keep things coordinated and to collaborate. Some aspects of research, usually you have to run around to find the right information, sometimes consult your experts internally, identify the industry best practices, all of that based on an understanding of what the NCUA is looking for, which may or may not be 100% accurate. Once all that's done, then you get to responding to the statements and completing the preparations for the exam, sharing best practices across the team, keeping up with what your actionable work items are, waiting for others to meet. This is a typical of a process. The new approach will significantly increase the time needed to be used in preparation because of that requirement for more extensive documentation of the responses. So working with our credit union, we've gone through and looked at where we can possibly save time for a team working on something like this. There's a number of busy work tasks. I call them busy work. They're important, but there are things that are easily automatable that can save significant, call it overhead time. Automating the tracking of status throughout the operation, generating standard reporting from a tool instead of having to assemble the inputs and create it manually, tracking the ownership of items and enforcing it through automation has some impact. Making sure those handoffs take place cleanly 100% of the time with no need to coordinate can actually have a significant potential cost saving. All told, in this area, we figure we can save about 6% of the time that goes into an exam. It's not a huge amount, but it is it's a step in the right direction, given the amount of effort that does go into exam preparation. In the next area we looked at how we might be able to use better tools and the effects those tools would have on the productivity of individuals. Having the NCUA guidance at your fingertips, knowing how they're going to assess you, and being able to use that as you prepare your response. We looked at that, and that will eliminate some rework and result in a quicker resolution. Having the documents right at your fingertips, the ones that are most relevant, the ones that are responsive to the DRL, to where you can see them and actually associate them with the statements as you're responding them, also has a significant impact from a cost savings perspective. Being able to focus your work to things assigned to you, to things that are just actionable, and then working related categories at the same time also has some impact. Altogether, again, a reasonable savings of about 8% is feasible by getting your access to the right information at the right time, very conveniently. In the third area, this is a little bit more broad. It involves looking at what a tool can do and changing how you might do work, adapting your process, as well as just automating and streamlining the process. One of the things our credit union spends a significant amount of time on is engaging internal experts to resolve items. So in our current, our previous process, we would take an IT person who would reach out to an HR person and then set a meeting and then sit down and talk through the different statements that involved HR, collect some of the evidence, come back, enter it all into the system, and then go back to HR to make sure they got it right. A tool could facilitate the HR person doing that work directly. No intermediary, so reducing the amount of time involved, probably increasing the accuracy of the initial response, has a fairly significant impact. Second area where we looked at and assessed is if you needed to understand industry best practices for a particular number of statements within the assessment, and you wanted to engage folks to help you with that. Some processes could take a good bit of time, but automation could build that actually into the workflow and allow direct engagement of those folks through inside of a tool. You get to the big ones, being able to collaborate without holding meetings, using a collaboration framework and automation, and letting people work when they have time, on their time, allowing them to just capture better little snippets of time instead of having to wait until they could get 3 or 4 people together to work on the project. Going down these paths, we believe can save up to 15%, which is a pretty significant amount of time and energy focused on this. We did do a test case on this for a $1 billion credit union, ran some of the numbers, and if we were effective in engaging all 3 different areas for that credit union, we looked at possibly saving upwards of $20 to $25K in staff costs over the course of an exam preparation. So how can we do that? Well, that's where our ACID portal comes in. It is a tool specifically built to address those issues with a secure document repository built into the tool, collaboration resources built into the tool so that people can share without having to get in meetings, with responsibility assignments and workflow that enforces the transitions of the items and the appropriate review processes, with built-in progress tracking and reporting, and putting that knowledge at each person's fingertips so that they're more effective when they're working through the exam. A couple of aspects of the tool before we go on into the demo. It is a workflow-driven system. That means that each item being worked goes through a process. That process is editable, tailorable, down to the item level. The base process has 6 steps in it, going from in-edit to review, approval, an outside review step, pending release, and then to the examiner. These 3 intermediate steps, in review, pending approval, and outside review, can be tailored out easily, conveniently, at an item level or at a group level to accommodate a different workflow within a credit union. Perhaps a smaller institution doesn't feel like it needs both a review and approval step, for instance. And certainly in many cases, outside review won't be involved. So the workflow is key. It manages the work on the items, make sure they go to the right person as each person finishes their work. Secondly, the system is role-based. We have a number of roles in it, from the editor that creates content, uploads document, resolves statement, through a reviewer, the approver steps, down to an oversight role, which is not involved in the workflow, but it's for management who want to keep abreast of the development, perhaps risk management, perhaps internal audits, who just want to have visibility into how the exam preparation is going. And finally, we have a step for the examiner where they can use the tool to collaborate with the credit union, or can also use the tool to extract the content into the ACIT format workbook for their review process. So going into the demo, what we're going to concentrate on showing y'all is how we assign and track responsibilities, how you can keep up with how the team is doing, both at the individual and the team level, what the collaboration pieces are, how you can stay abreast of what the rest of the team is doing, how you know how the exam is maturing, and finally the actual work aspects of answering the statements, updating the documentation, and resolving the items. So with that said, let me go ahead and bring up the ACIT portal. When it comes up, I'm going to go ahead and connect in as an admin first. I'd like to show you how we do the responsibility assignment piece. So each credit union that uses the tool does have an admin person. This is a person who administers the tool. That essentially means configuring it for the credit union's preferences, setting up things like a logo, a start and end date for the cycle, uploading a CAT document if you happen to have a CAT and you want to maintain the work that you put into there. Key, establishing the maturity level, target for the exam, anywhere from just baseline for getting started all the way up to innovative if you're going to target the full thing. NCUA generally says first time around target baseline or evolving. And then by targeting, that filters out the other aspects of it, so those don't create confusion or visual clutter when folks are attempting to work through the pieces that are most relevant. So quickly going through this, the tool allows you to create accounts for each individual. The accounts are assigned to a role. You may have multiple people in each role, anywhere from editors to outside review to the examiner. Once you have your resources assigned, created, then you can move through to doing assignments. Assignments is our way of saying who's responsible for each item at each step in the process. So if we look at this now, we're assigning for technologies and connections types under risk profile. This is a grouping of about 10 different statements, grouped as the NCUA had grouped them. You have the choice of choosing who's going to edit the content from anyone who's actually in the edit role, all the way down to just unassigning the step if you're not ready. The review step, same way. You pick anyone who's in the review, but you can also choose to skip the step. And if you choose to skip the step, no review process is done. It goes straight from edit to the approved state. So changing that back. We go through that same process here. You can see outside review is already skipped. We're not going to go through outside review for the technology and connection types. This same approach is done for all the different aspects of the risk profile. Here you can see where we're actually bringing in an outside resource to support us on the external threat. Coming in the release next week is the ability to go in and override these general assignments at the category level on each individual item. So if of those 10 items, you wanted 9 of them to be responded to by IT support, but 1 of them by maybe electronic services, you would be able to go in and take that 1 item and set up the editor as electronic services. By giving that level of granularity, we're giving ultimate control to the credit union on who does what and how they want the workflow to go for each item. Same approach is used for the domain and the documentation. You just go through for each category, pick the individuals that are appropriate for it. Software development, well, the software developers get to respond to that one. So that's it. It's fairly simple, but it's key to understanding how the assignments are also instantiating the workflow at a group and at an item level. Going from there, I'd like to log in as an approver role and demonstrate certain aspects of the system and how they help with saving time. So the approver is one of our higher authority roles within the system. They get certain dashboards that are unique to them. But first, before we go through that, each individual who has a role in the workflow gets what we call their work progress dashboard. In this case, it's for the approver. This person, the approver, you can see in each of the different areas how much work they were assigned, 39 items, how many they finished, 34, where they should be on today's date based on the schedule that we established back as the admin, and color coding to indicate whether they're on schedule, ahead of schedule, or behind schedule, which we are in case on the domains here. Every individual also gets a recent changes card. This card shows what's changed in the system recently. It is driven by work that others do. It is also sensitive to what we call the view filter up here. This allows a user to focus on the items that they care about at any particular time. So they can look at all items, and you'll see the numbers change here on the recent changes. Their items that are ready to be worked, and by doing that, you focus down very fast to, hey, there's 10 things in the domains and 13 in the document list that I really care to look at because these are relevant to work that I'm ready to do. So you can see, in this case, a comment was added on this statement 323 by the VP of IT related to that statement. 416 was promoted to approver review so that it's ready for us to action. You can see that. If I'm interested in going back on this item, I simply flag it. That moves it into my flag queue. And I can then come back to it and look at 416 if I wish, or remember to come back to it. So by clicking through on that, I can get straight to that statement that's been just moved to be ready for my review, look at the information that's been provided on it, the answer to it, view the associated documentation. And by doing that, I'm able to stay in sync with what people have done. I'm able to focus what I look at down to what's most relevant to me at the moment. And, that makes me a good bit more efficient. This chart, the progress overview chart, is specific really to a approver and above role. This allows you to see how the team is progressing as a total towards meeting the schedule. So you get to see the different stages in the main workflow. You can see where the forecast line is, what your target line was. So we're supposed to be done in late March. Looks like we're coming in about right about on schedule at this point. You can see here the piece that's lagging is the approvals, 55%, and they'll need to be approved. If we wanted to, we can look at it on each of the different technology areas. So in terms of getting done, domains are falling well behind the target date. The risk profiles coming in ahead. The documents are coming in even further ahead based on the work that's been completed so far. So this is a good way to get visibility to figure out where you may want to focus as a manager in encouraging the team to progress. This role also gets a couple of dashboards provided by the NCUA. These are updated in real time with the data as it changes, showing you your maturity level on the domains and your risk profile, how it's calculated, what the different responses are, whether you've completed the effort or not. Finally, in that context for visibility and management, we have a detailed domain maturity report. This report shows you for those levels of maturity you've chosen to target, in this case through evolving. If we had chosen up through innovative, there'd be 5 columns here. You can see when you've completed the response, what the rating is. Red indicates you haven't started to respond. We've got one case where we're sub-baseline, or a couple of cases of that coming out. A key thing to this tool is the ability to see what it will look like in the future. So going back and looking at all the data based on that information that's in the edit state or beyond gives you a much different view, of how your maturity will evolve. I'm just pointing out several more that are sub-baseline, a couple that are evolving, and some baseline. That's to allow you to just see, not just from where your perspective is as the reviewer, but how it looks like coming through edit. If you really want to focus in on where you're sub-baseline, you can click through. In this case, it's pretty obvious why we're sub-baseline. Statement 144, which is part of baseline, we gave a no response to because we didn't have a process in place to integrate threat intelligence into risk planning. To move beyond sub-baseline, we would have to resolve this issue and turn the no into a yes. So that's how quickly the tool can kind of give you visibility into your maturity status and how it's evolving. At this point, go back here, I'd like to demonstrate how a reviewer would actually do some of their day-to-day work. Looking at it saying, okay, domains is where I'm behind. Let me look at the things that are ready for me to work. So here I am in governance. Maybe I want to focus on baseline maturity only, so I can turn off the evolving. Perhaps, I don't want to look at oversight right now. I can turn that off, and I get 4 statements that are ready for me to basically do review work on. So that review work consists of looking at the statement, understanding the comment threads that have been put in place by your team, by the risk management folks, and then also looking at the associated, so other things you have at your fingertips as the approver. You have the guide information that shows you how the NCUA intends to examine you on this. The contextual comments that they provided, some baseline mappings to security frameworks that can also help. But this is really key, looking at how they're going to review you. They're going to look at your guidelines for information security. They're going to look at the board packages and committee meeting minutes to see particular things. So knowing that, we can look at the documentation that's been provided. Here's the security program. And the comment saying that it dictates an annual review. We can see that, open up the document itself, and step through it to view that context if we wish. And do the same thing with the board minutes. In this case, we've shown just one month's worth of board minutes, referenced what's relevant in it. That information looks on track. If we're comfortable with it, we can select to approve the item. And we would find out that we need to provide some commentary on the documents so that the examiner knows why they're there and what's most relevant in them. So that's how an approver would work through items. At the domain maturity level, the documentation level is relatively similar. We focus on those things that are ready for us to work. In this case, it calls for job descriptions. Here's the job description document. We can pull it up right at our fingertips, no hunting around for it, look over it, make sure it's current, that it's responsive. An aspect here that if we wanted to, we can see who loaded the document. Human Resources did. They've changed the answer to yes, saying we were responsive, pushed it through review. The VP of Human Resources actually reviewed it, sent it on to us as the approver. We approved it. Then it went to the examiner. The examiner in this case sent it back, saying, just saying they wanted to see more broad on the documentation. So they rejected it, sent it back. It's now ready for us to action as the approver. We would probably send it back to the editor saying, so by doing that, statement disappears from our view because we're just focused on items in our work. It's now back at the editor for them to add additional documentation to it. That's a quick demo of how an approver would work, the different visibility that we provide through the tool, and how that can really help them to focus in on the exam process. Importantly, to discuss, this being an online portal, with the collaboration built in, this person, when they have 15 minutes, can log in, see what's changed, go in and action some of the changed items, and so take full advantage of small increments of time to be able to make progress against what they're assigned to perform. So before I leave, I'd like to log out and log in as one of the editors, the people that actually do most of the work, create the content in the system. So a couple of things to see. The editor, as I said, everyone has a work progress card. This gentleman is assigned to documents and to domains. He doesn't have any risk profile assignments, so they don't show. Here's the recent changes, entries for him. If he wants to look at it just on my items to work, I have a much more compact listing of changes related to these items. Going through it, here's the one we just rejected. So as this rejected item, we could open up. Well, it was a different rejection, but you can see, I think that saying the incorrect documents were referenced in pulling the linkage. As the editor, I might have to then go in and rethink the document associations I had made, go into edit, and looking at this, perhaps that isn't the most current org chart, I have to go get a different one, or I needed to include the succession plans, but not the job descriptions. I would be able to change the document associations, and now they're altered. Here's the succession plan available. If we were happy, we would then say, advise what we had done and resubmit it up. Then we'd have to add our comment for the new document we added, explaining why it was relevant to the item. So once that's done, we can close, send it back forward for review and approval. That's one aspect of how an editor would work. He does not have any items, as I said, in this area. So looking further here, this one hasn't been addressed at all yet. As an editor, I can look at it. We're basically formally approving changes, authority, and separation of duties. I would look at the guide information. They're going to look at our change management processes. They're going to look at change management records. So as an editor, I would start by looking for the appropriate documentation. Maybe I have it here. Nope. But the point would be we will find the appropriate documentation as they have identified it and link that to the statement, then go back in and address the statement response, anywhere from no, we don't comply, to it's not applicable, to yes, or yes with compensating controls. If we say it's yes with compensating controls, when we go to submit it, we have to provide an explanation so that that information is captured. And then if I go back to my items, you can see now that everyone who views it going forward sees that comment regarding the compensating controls and is able to understand why it's a yes with compensating controls. Easily as the editor, if I realized I had left something out, I can pull that statement back, and it's back within my control to edit. I might change the compensating control comment, change it from a yes-see to a different statement, add documents. So that's how an editor generally works with the tool. Again, they benefit from having the guide information right at their fingertips, access to the document library as they're preparing their responses, ability to see what has been done on previous statements. If they want to look across all items, not just theirs, they're then given visibility into what others may have done in terms of similar piece statements, how they were resolved, what the commentary threads were. Lastly, in this role, we do end up working on the documents themselves, so focusing to my items to work. I see I just have one item, DRL 11B. I look at it, I haven't given a response to it yet. It's looking for independent reports of SOC 2. I look, asset inventory clearly is not the right file. So I go ahead and delete asset inventory. That removes it from the archive and overwrites the location where it was with a DoD wipe algorithm. So it's no longer recoverable. I then go in and look to get the right file in place. And so I'm able to go back to my library of potential documentation, however that was assembled. This would be different for each organization. There's the SOC 2 I was looking for on ongoing operations. I'm going to go ahead and put their contract in as well because I think it's also relevant. Just select those two. The files then get uploaded to the archive. They then become available for folks working the different statements to view, to use as evidence, and they themselves can go through a review process at this point. I could change the statement to, yes, we're compliant with this request, submit it, and it goes on to the review process. So that's generally what we wanted to show in the tool and how it helps you to work more efficiently, to stay in touch with what other team members are doing, to focus your efforts down to the pieces you care about, to have the information you need right at your fingertips. Before I leave the tool, I want to open up with Alicia and see if there are any questions relevant to the actual tool or how the tool is used. Alicia, have we got any?
Yes, it looks like we do have a couple of questions from attendees today. The first one is, what browsers does it work with?
Good question. So we've made it work with Internet Explorer, IE 11, with Edge, and with Chrome. We're using pretty much standard HTML, so it should work with other browsers, Opera, Mozilla, but it has only been tested with those 3 that I mentioned.
Wonderful, thank you. And it looks like we do have a second question here. How do we know our documents are secure?
That's a good and important question. I didn't dwell on it, but we use a service called Virtual Strongbox behind the tool to house all of the sensitive information. Virtual Strongbox is an industry leader in providing a secure collaboration platform for documentation. And they, as an example, they're used by a couple of hundred credit unions to provide virtual safety deposit boxes to their membership where they can put sensitive documents into it and know that they're secure. So we leverage that technology. We store clients' documents in their vaults where they're only accessible to the clients, and where, you know, should a document be deleted, as I showed, it's overwritten, made certain that the information is not recoverable. Any other?
Wonderful, thank you so much. And it does look like we have a third question currently. How long does it take to get the system up and running for a credit union?
Sure, good question. So this is a SaaS portal. It takes us a couple of hours as a Redstone Consulting Group to configure it for a new client credit union, at which time we're able to turn it over to the credit union's designated application administrator, go through some initial training with that individual within a couple of days, and then that person, by our experience, you know, will take another few days, not so much in basically around figuring out the roles they want to put in the system, the people that will have access, and what statements they'll be responsible for. So all told, you know, a day or so for the Redstone Consulting team, and probably another several days, up to maybe a week, for the application administrator for the credit union, and then it's ready to rock and roll.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And it looks like we do not have any other questions at this time. Just a reminder for attendees, you can ask a question at any point by entering your question into the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. No further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. Well, I just have a couple of slides to go through to wrap up now that we're done with the demo. This is our capability roadmap for the product. You know, the first release is in production. Those items of the second release that have check marks by them are in production or will be in production starting next week. Some other items we're working on we think are neat. The summary board report and manager reports have gone through with our internal audit staff, with our CISO. We've pulled out what they think is the most relevant information, created a standard report, and we'll be turning that on in the tool soon. A couple of other areas coming in our third release, which will be in Q1 of next year. We'll begin to do my favorite, user nudging, which is monitoring how the different people are doing against their assignments and their timeline, and when either it's been a long time since they've been in the system or they're beginning to fall behind you know, the schedule, we'll send nudging emails to them to remind them to pay attention to the work that's necessary to get the exam done on time. That's coupled with intelligent notifications, grouping together some of the recent changes into some conversation threads. So pretty quickly you can see once a week what's changed that's most relevant for you. Moving on into our fourth release, targeted for the second quarter of next year. Interesting things to me, particularly, we'll implement what we call prior year cloning. That means when you finish your first exam year, you're able to save that, basically cast it in amber so that it's there for reference always. Create a clone of it to start your new year. You benefit from everything that you've done up to that point, and you just basically can build on top of that, which will could dramatically shorten the cycle in the second year of preparing. Also, we're looking to build a user forum into the tool where the ability to ask questions back and forth within the tool across the different credit union clients that are using the system. Just quick the very quick infomercial, we're the Redstone Consulting Group. We're a QSO owned by Redstone Federal Credit Union, which is one of the largest and most technologically advanced in the country. We were founded in 2012. The board approved some venture capital for us in 2017, which has got us off and running at a good clip. Our goal is to commercialize technology that Redstone Credit Union develops, to work with Redstone and other financial institutions to create solutions that solve industry problems, like the ACID portal we just showed you. We also focus on DNA core software development. Just here at the end of the webinar, I'd like to ask again if there are any other questions that have come in, Alicia.
Yes, it does look like we've received just a few questions in the WebEx console so far. The first one is, how far in advance should we start preparing for the exam?
Good question. Our team believes that 6 months is about where you should start ahead of when you need to have the data ready for the examiners. That gives enough time to work it as a part of routine business instead of crashing on it as a project toward the end. So that's our recommendation, about 6 months out.
Great, thank you. And a follow-up question is, what if the NCUA changes the contents of the exam?
Good question. We expect that that's going to happen. It's happened to us once already. Part of why we provide the tool is a subscription service. The service includes us adapting to any changes that they may make in the exam. And the tool was built specifically for that. So, we key off the ACID workbook they have, suck that in as the content, and use that to create the statements that need to be resolved, the documents that need to be provided. All that piece is automated. And last time they changed it, they made very significant mods to the document list. It actually did take us a couple of weeks to do the updates, but once that was done, we were able to field using the new way that they were viewing documentation.
Thank you so much. And our next question is, what does the tool cost?
Cost always matters. Understand. Our tool is tiered based on the asset value, the asset base of the credit union. It goes on the low end for credit unions of about $100 million and up. It's a little over $2,000 a year, going on up to very large credit unions where it caps out at $15,000 a year. Those are our list prices. If you have interest, we are offering significant discounts here for early adopters and for orders received by the end of the year.
Great, thank you. And it looks like this may be our last question from the Q&A panel is, what's the best approach for working on preparing for the exam inside of the tool?
That's actually a complicated question and a two-part answer. The first advice we would give is spend time up front planning before you even get into the tool itself. Figure out who's part of the effort, what their skills are, what roles they'll fulfill, so that you can create the accounts and make the assignments quickly. Our recommendation is, because the tool facilitates a lot of the administration pieces of it, you can look at a broader user community than you might have done in the past, where you were having to manually coordinate the work. That may allow you to tap someone in human resources to work the human resources questions and documents, as an example. Whereas in the past, you might have had to have a IT person that was part of the core team go get with human resources to do that work. Another key is figuring out what your maturity level target is going to be. And the tool makes it trivial to set it, but there's a lot of thought that should go into, am I going to target baseline only? Am I going to strive for evolving on this particular exam? Do I want to start at baseline and 3 months in, if I'm looking really good, change the setting to target evolving? So, knowing the maturity level that you want to target is important. The second thing we would say is plan on a two-pass approach. Once the tool's up and running, the users are in, our suggested way of going about this is go through, have your users go through their statements, put their initial responses in based on their first impressions. We found those to be usually pretty relevant, pretty on target. Then in a second pass, once the documents are actually established, the documentation list is done, go back and re-look at those answers based on the documents that are available. Find the right context in those documents to either substantiate the initial impression or change it to match what the documentation shows. And in doing that approach, we think you get to get speed through getting it in there based on your gut feeling, substantiated by the evidence in the second pass, and that seems to us to have been the most efficient way to go about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And it looks like we do not have any other questions through the Q&A panel on the WebEx console. Because we do not have any other questions there, I am just going to go ahead and open the floor for questions via the audio lines. Just a note for our attendees, if you would like to ask a question over the audio line, please press *# on your telephone keypad. Again, the command to ask a question is *# on the phone. We'll pause for just a moment to see if we have any questions over the phone line. And it looks like we do not have any questions at this time. Just one last call for questions over the audio line. It is *# to ask a question. All right, and no questions at this time.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending. This webinar will be posted on our website if you want to look at it or any of the previous webinars we've given regarding the ACIP portal. We do have one additional webinar coming up in mid-December on how how the ACIP portal can help with your success in the examination process itself. If you wish to learn any more about the portal between now and then, you can visit our website at the URL shown or reach out to Jim Bray at the address and/or phone number shown. And remember that if you wish to order within the next 30 days, there's a 10% discount available based on mentioning Save Time and Energy. Thank you again for your time. Hope to see you on the webinar in December.
Thank you again to all of our attendees for joining us today. This does conclude today's conference. You may now disconnect.